Good morning, Simon. Very happy to catch up after quite some time. I know you have been working on batteries and you are one of the foremost experts in Australia on batteries, on strategies where things are, and you also did some testing. So it's great to catch up. So how have you been?
I've been really well. No, thank you, Sahel. It is good to catch up. It's been quite a while. Yeah, I appreciate that intro. Yeah, we've been working with batteries for a long time and been doing well. Obviously, I think everyone's adjusting to the new normal of the world at the moment. But yeah, so far, I think in Australia we've dodged most of the worst of it.
Yes, hope so. And hope so the rest of the world follows soon as well, the same path, or able to follow rather. So maybe a general introduction, who you are, what you do, so that my listeners have a feel for who we are talking to.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So my name's Simon Franklin, and I'm the managing director of a company called ITP Renewables. We're part of a global group of companies called ITP Energize Group. We have offices throughout the world, predominantly in the UK, India, China, and over here in Australia. So we're a consulting company focusing on the renewable energy market, providing advice both at a strategy level, so looking at things like energy market analytics, programs to encourage uptake of renewable energy, and also engineering and compliance services. So we do a lot of owner's engineer design services and also product testing, which I think was one of the things that you and I have discussed in the past, particularly around storage.
Yes, yes, yes. So product testing, but I think you may be one of the very few people in the world doing battery testing. I think the other person I met was University of Hawaii.
Yeah, there are very few, particularly that give away the data publicly. So there is a testing lab in the US run by DNVGL as well. They have quite a big testing lab, but they do mostly contract-based testing. So the results are often closed. They don't share those with the market. Whereas all the data we produce is freely available. We host it all on our website, which is the batterytestcentre.com.au. And yeah, we try to test as many products as we can and sort of completely independent in that testing and just providing the data to the market so people can make informed decisions.
Oh, so all your data available on the website that people can come and check. And these are, I believe, these are real life, right?
Yeah, that's right. So we try to keep the data as up to date as possible. We have a constant stream up there. There's usually a lag in getting the data up onto the website of about 12 to 24 hours, but otherwise it's basically real-time results. We've had about 24 different batteries come through the testing facility so far in different phases. So the initial testing started back in I think 2016 now. We first launched the lab in March of that year with the initial with the initial 8 batteries. We've had some battery failures over the time, and we've replaced those with different models. The website has graphs showing performance of the batteries, but you can also write to us and request a full detailed time series data if you're an academic or someone and you really want to drill into that data in more detail as well.
Wow. So you have expanded quite a bit as well. So what's your feel now that you are seeing more and more batteries coming into the market, more and more consumers taking interest, and the portfolio is growing? Where you see we are headed in terms of battery? What's the future?
I mean, it's a really interesting question and one that it's interesting being in the Australian market for, I think, because I think in some ways Australia is really leading this push for a couple of reasons. One is we have a really high uptake of rooftop PV in Australia. We've got sort of over 2 million households with PV on their roof already, and we have relatively high time of use tariffs for electricity as well in some of the states. So that's encouraging people to put batteries in to get better value for their systems. So we're starting to see a significant uptake. What we're seeing, which will probably help to drive that uptake as well, is new business models around how you value the services those batteries can provide back to the grid, so that whether they can inject power back into the grid when the grid needs it most. And to me, that's one of the most interesting parts of this whole ecosystem is a battery can provide a number of services beyond just storing energy for use at later times. It's a very fast response mechanism to solve grid issues. And finding a way to value those for consumers can allow a much more robust and better energy system overall. We're also seeing quite a big uptake in more of the utility scale batteries here in Australia as well. And that's predominantly because they're very good at solving some of the frequency control issues on the network, which we have over here. And as we have increasing amounts of variable renewables come in, we need those batteries more and more. So it's a really exciting time. We've seen a lot of uptake at both, the domestic level, but also increasingly at the utility level as well.
Yes, because the South Australian Hornsdale power battery is quite world famous, right? And that's been competing with the gas directly, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the data that is actually showing that it's much quicker to respond than the gas and can provide some of the services that the gas can't. It's also showing that the battery really is very valuable to its owners, and that's encouraged other batteries. We've now seen some of the big energy gentailers here in Australia commit to major programs of battery rollouts, and one of the first of those up in Queensland has been signed recently, and that should be even larger than the Hornsdale battery, and that should be coming online in probably in the next 12 months or so. So that's exciting to see more batteries around the country, and I think that will ultimately start to put downward pressure on some of the pricing we have around FCAS services in the market, and that should ultimately lead to a better result to consumers, and also allow more renewable energy to come into the market as well.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I always pondered and want to get your views on, as batteries become cheaper, as batteries become accepted, so all appliances, especially in residences and commercial premises, might come with built-in batteries. Then obviously this concept of peak and off-peak will slowly diminish, right? Like my computer or your computer, when we switch it on, it doesn't go to the grid, it goes to its battery first, right? It has a built-in battery. So that might have quite a large impact, no?
Yeah, look, I think it will. For me, the thing that's probably or potentially will have the largest impact is actually the electric vehicle market and having vehicle to grid technology. If you've got a, by far the largest battery in a home will be sitting inside someone's car. Now, if you don't need that at certain times of the day, or at times where your peak use for the house is high, you could easily draw power from that vehicle and then charge it up at another time. So I see vehicle to grid technology as both the biggest opportunity for network operators to improve their services, but also the biggest risk to them if they implement their policies poorly. If they implement their policies poorly, all the vehicles are going to draw power at the worst possible time, and we're going to exacerbate a problem that already exists. However, if they implement their incentive scheme properly, they will reduce pressure on the grid and reduce costs, and mean that they don't need future augmentation. The same argument is for any of the products in the house along those lines, household batteries or appliances that are either able to be run at different times of the day or can run off a storage device, for a short period of time.
Let me push that hypothesis a little bit. Now, you are saying that prevailing assumption today is the largest battery in the home will be the battery on wheels or your electric cars, because based on today's price and today's trend, right?
Yep.
But if battery becomes, when it becomes $50 a kilowatt hour or something, and anyone will have 100 kilowatt hour or even a 200 kilowatt hour battery in the house, because the car battery is now about 50 to 100, no? So that balance might change, no?
Yeah, look, it really could. And it really depends on, I suppose, people's usage patterns and whether they can get the value out of that battery, which, I think increasingly as the costs come down, you could see the majority of residents have the ability to effectively run islanded from the grid with no need for supply for long periods of time. And then you can get households to really draw energy from the grid at times that makes the most sense for the system as a whole. And that means that can really support the implementation of more renewable energy, more solar and wind into the grid, because it can be balanced by the load side, which is the household drawing power, at the time that it suits the generators, rather than drawing power at the time that suits the load.
Yeah, because I interviewed Torstein, one of my friend. He's in Norway setting up a gigafactory that's coming online 2023. And this is the first time I heard battery price in double digits. So that's what
it's exciting, isn't it? It's really exciting time.
And they're talking about large volume car companies. So yeah, I'll send you a link once I post that in. But it's quite fascinating because average home in Australia now, well, it's still $1 million. So if you put a 100 kilowatt hour battery for $5,000, so maybe 10,000. It's really not much, but it can free up free electricity if you like with a solar on rooftop, right? Because right now we are all trying to optimize with the small spaces, no?
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's true. I think once we get to those price points, we'll really see an explosion, and it's going to force the market to make a change. And how does the traditional model adapt? And anyone, I suppose, who has skepticism over those prices being achieved, you only need to look at the prices in the PV world to realize that prices will drop for batteries, and they will drop quickly. I mean, when I started in the industry, we were still talking about, $8 a watt for a PV module, whereas, we can buy them now at, 19.5 cents. They're 530 watt modules and growing. Someone just released a 620 watt module, I think, the other day. So it's only going further, and that's going to be the same message with storage as well. It'll come down to those sorts of prices and quicker than anyone thinks.
Yes, I mean, I did a project in the Philippines on electric vehicle. I think the first time we bought batteries was $1,400 a kilowatt hour.
Yeah, that's right. It's come a long way from there.
Yeah, right now it's 200. Full stop, even cheaper. So yeah, it's the world has changing. Now, how do you think the home market is shaping up in Australia now? Because you do a lot of tests, and you said the numbers have grown, no?
Yeah, look, the numbers are growing. They're possibly not even growing as fast as was initially thought, and that's got to do with a couple of things. Part of it's been, while the underlying cell cost of the batteries is continually coming down, we're not seeing that necessarily at a product level in Australia yet. So the products themselves, so to buy a Powerwall 2 or an LG Chem or something like that, is not significantly cheaper than it was a couple of years ago. So we're not seeing that downward price pressure. We're also seeing there was quite a lot of product immaturity going back a couple of years. So while the underlying chemistry of the batteries was quite strong, you ended up having failures for products around things like communications errors between inverters and batteries and those sorts of things. And they're only just starting to get sort of improved, and the technology is only just starting to become more mature when we talk about a residential product. So as that matures and people get a better experience with the product, I think we'll see the uptake continue to increase significantly. All the signs are there for the market to really explode in the coming years. But it's probably, while we've had strong growth, it's probably behind where it potentially could have been if some of those issues had been addressed. It'll be really interesting to see what happens over the coming couple of years, I suppose, where we've got competing things around consumer confidence is probably going to be low with economic conditions, but similarly, people will be looking to make investments that they think will save them money in the long term. So it'll be interesting to see what the market looks like over the next 18 to 24 months, I think.
So let's look at the Australian market. As you said, I mean, of course, this is one of the most sophisticated market on rooftop solar and batteries as well. There are a lot of incentives out there, right, for batteries.
Absolutely, yeah.
Can you maybe let's start with the incentive. What's the government trying to do promote batteries?
At the moment, we don't have a strong Commonwealth scheme, so it's mostly being run by the states. So South Australia is a good example. They're running quite large rollouts of batteries, and for good reason, because their grid is quite weak and can be volatile. So they're encouraging consumers to put batteries in because they know it will strengthen their grid, and they're sharing the cost of those batteries with consumers. So they've had programs to roll out 50,000 plus batteries with incentives to consumers in the form of direct grants. They've also then aggregated the performance of those batteries up through virtual power plants to try to support the grid and get benefit out of the battery. And I suppose this is one of the points I touched on in the beginning. The battery can provide so many additional services that if you can capture those through a VPP or similar, you can really share the cost of the battery. So it's not borne entirely by the consumer, but it's borne by the grid as a whole, and will bring those costs down. So South Australia's got a strong program. It's got a program for low income earners as well, so that they can encourage a bit of equality in that market. New South Wales has a loan scheme for batteries. So that's got a no interest loan scheme, as does Victoria. And Queensland's got a program that's encouraging them, but none of those schemes are as broad or as far-reaching as the schemes we have in place for rooftop solar. So we're hopeful, I suppose, that we'll see more schemes coming in the future. It was definitely one of the sort of election commitments prior to the last election of the opposition who didn't get up, was to have a wider ranging scheme come in for batteries. So I'm hoping that the coalition government can see a way to getting a scheme around household batteries moving forward as well.
So how does this scheme look like, say, South Australia, the 50,000? So there is obviously a kilowatt hour set limit where the government shares the cost, or for the societal benefit to share later on, right?
Yeah, that's right. So they provide basically an upfront discount on the battery through the form of a grant, and in return for that, there's a certain set of features that the battery needs to have so that it can provide support to the grid through an aggregator. It's not too dissimilar to one of the ones I missed is there's a program in the ACT, which was probably one of the first ones to roll out. Mm-hmm. That was really interesting because it provided a grant to the battery, but it was based on the peak sustained output of the battery. So it was based on basically the ability of the battery to support the grid for a period of time. And so there was a fairly open number of suppliers and technologies that you could use to get that grant, but the battery needed to meet certain requirements, and particularly around data capture and stuff, so that they could really test what the benefits of those batteries could be. Now, the states like South Australia have now built on that, so it's not just around data capture, but it's around ability to be called on in times of need. What I find it really interesting is there are some now private sector organisations who are subsidising batteries. So this is the DNSPs, the network providers, who are subsidising batteries into certain suburbs and locations on their grid, where they'll pay a percentage of the cost for the consumer. That could be anything up to 50 to 75% of the cost of the battery.
50 to 75%.
Yeah, in some trials that's that high. And all they ask is that the battery is made available for them for usually about a dozen events per year. So they can predict when they're going to have a shortage of capacity on their grid in advance. They give 24 hours notice to the battery. The battery has to be fully charged and ready to go at that time, and then they take control of the battery. And what they're finding is investing that amount of money in rebates for batteries is far cheaper than upgrading feeders and substations to deliver the same service. So it's a really interesting business model that we're now starting to see, not just government incentives, but also private sector incentives to encourage.
So you're basically chopping off that very sharp end of the low duration curve, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because the network has to be designed for those few peak events per year to make sure that you don't have a brownout or a blackout on the network. You only need maybe an hour, 2 hours worth of ride through for those events where it's 48 degrees in Western Sydney and everyone turns their air conditioner on at the same time. If you've got the batteries to ride through that event, you can avoid having to put a new transformer in or a new power line in to support that.
Wow. So you said, let me get a handle on this one. So if I go to the market, and there will be a number of batteries that this scheme supports. So if I had to invest into $10,000 worth of batteries, I can get 7,500 up to that amount potentially be paid by the government or something.
No, this scheme was quite narrow in that you had to opt into the scheme and you had to use a particular product. In this case, this private sector one, the more open schemes like in the ACT tend to provide a discount that's more around about 30 to 40% of the product cost. So
yeah,
you might,
mean,
if
basically
you
the cost sharing, right? Cost sharing upfront.
Absolutely.
With the promise to share benefits in future.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, because I personally think a lot of the countries that I work in, of course, they may be 4 or 5 years behind, but these are the thinking that needs to come in place while you are planning a network upgrade, certain SAIDI, SAIFI getting out of control in a particular area, power quality is poor, a battery solution, and then people talk about we don't have space. That's when you give incentive people to put batteries in their homes so that the society can use, right?
Yeah, I mean, the real benefit of that is sharing the cost as well, because,
yes,
and that can make the battery stack up commercially in a completely different way. It may not make sense, for example, purely from the utilities point of view to put a, utility scale battery at their substation to deal with this. Similarly, it might not quite make sense commercially for a householder to put a battery in to shift their usage. But together, if they share the benefits, it does make sense for them combined. So yeah, that's where the market gets really interesting.
And then there is also the concept of community batteries, right?
Yeah, and that's a little bit more similar to situations where it makes more sense for a suburb or a town as a whole to have a community-owned battery than have them individually at people's households, so they can offset some of this network augmentation that's required. Or maybe you have a group of people who are in an apartment block and can't put a battery within their own apartments, and so they want to have a shared ownership model of those batteries. It's still a bit cheaper to put larger scale batteries in than it is to put domestic batteries in as well. You still get a few of those economies of scale. You tend to get more features from larger scale batteries in terms of their ability to, ride through faults and things like that as well. So that's, there are some of the drivers that lead to people putting in these community batteries.
Yeah, but now if you put the COVID-19 glasses on, a lot of people are worried about many things, and power supply being one of them as well. Okay, if suddenly there is a typhoon or some natural disaster, again, I may be out of power. So power, energy security viewpoint, if someone said, no, I'll put it on, let me go to the market. So what should people look for when they want to buy? I mean, let me go through how many products are out there in Australian market now, if you are doing that.
Oh, look, there's a number of products available. There's tens of products available. However, there's some real leaders in the market, so people who pick up a large percentage of the market share. When you're looking for a battery, what you really want to look for is basically whatever you can find in terms of a track record of the supplier of the technology that it's going to last. It's still a fairly new market, so you need to know that the company that's giving you a warranty is going to be around to honour that warranty as well. So look for a company that's going to be around long term. Then you need to look at what you want to use the battery for. If you're in the middle of a city and you have no concerns over power quality or blackouts, then just get a fairly standard battery that's relatively low cost that can help you shift power to times you want to. However, if you're living on the fringe of grid or in an area where you're wanting to increase your power security, then you need to look for a product that has more functions. So the ability to operate in an islanded mode, meaning when the grid goes out, the battery can still operate. And you need to look at the power settings on those batteries. So what we found is consumers often don't realize how power hungry their house is. So at one time, how much power, instantaneous power they can draw from the grid. And so they expect that when the grid goes out and their battery kicks in, they can continue to use all the appliances they were before. But if that's not really the case, there's a limit on the draw you can get from a normal size battery. Call it a 10 to 15 kilowatt hour battery. So this is somewhere in the sort of, LG Chem, Pylon Tech, BYD, or Tesla Powerwall sort of range. They're sort of some of the bigger products. They can usually only put out, maybe say 5 kilowatts maximum. Now that's really enough to run. As soon as you start turning on the kettle and the oven and the vacuum cleaner all at the same time, you're going to blow all of those things. You're going to blow your switch. So what you really need to do is be really sensible about saying, either run a secondary essential services circuit in the house that will run off the battery when it trips over, or understand that when you have a power outage, you can't do everything you would normally do, but you can run your TV, you can run your internet, you can run all your computers, because they draw very small amounts of power, and you can do maybe one of the other things. You can keep your fridge on, you can keep your lights on, the important stuff, but don't go and try and cook a roast and vacuum at the same time, because that's going to put a lot of strain on the system. So just be sensible. The only caveat to say that is most of the products are so good now that you won't even know you had a blackout, because they'll trip over so seamlessly that you don't even realize that everybody else's house in the street doesn't have power anymore and yours still does, because the systems are so good at switching over.
Wow. So we are seeing that change slowly coming in. So if I started shopping for a battery, and you said you are testing some of those batteries, is the consumer association like Choice also started doing battery testing? I mean, what do
so Choice hasn't, but Choice has partnered with us to write some reviews based on the data that we've produced. And I suppose that's what we're trying to promote is we really don't want people out there reinventing the wheel. There's no point sort of redoing the testing. So we're trying to make our data as freely available to as many people as possible, and partner with organizations like Choice so they can write an analysis and make commentary on that. So Choice definitely do have some good articles on batteries. Check the website as well. Have a look at the data that we've produced. It's all there. It's all available, as well as the data that's continually updated on the website. We do a 6-monthly report, which really goes into detail analysing the different products and drills into some of the issues that may have cropped up with those products. But it's important to really get a good feel of not only the product itself, but who's going to come and install it, and what sort of quality of that workmanship they're going to do. It's the same as in anything. As much as the product is important, the tradespeople who are installing them are also important, and the work that they do.
So is there a certification scheme, or any electrician can do batteries these days, or their government society has some scheme that that this trade person actually had some training on this?
Yeah, so there is a certification scheme in Australia. However, it's related to solar and battery systems. Now, because there's no overarching rebate scheme for batteries, there's no way to administer a scheme to have an accredited battery installer necessarily from an industry point of view. So taking a step back, legally in Australia, any electrician can install batteries or solar and they can pass the electrical works tests that they need to in many states and territories. However, to be eligible for the grants that are associated with solar, you need to be Clean Energy Council accredited installer. Now, because there's no grants for batteries, you don't have to be a Clean Energy Council accredited installer to install the batteries, unless they're coupled with a PV system, and then you do. However, the vast bulk of battery systems are being installed by accredited installers. There is a scheme out there. It's just not mandated across the board by the electrical safety inspectors at this point. We hope that will be the case, because there are some intricacies with batteries that really need to be covered. Now, from a product side, there are safety standards and product standards in place, and there's a new performance standard that's being developed at the moment and is under consultation at the moment. So a group got some funding over here. It was a partnership between the CSIRO, I think Deakin University down in Victoria, and also DNVGL. They took a bunch of the data that we had produced on performance testing, and they are developing a performance standard for batteries, so that we don't just have a product safety standard, we also have performance standards. And then there's also installation standards in terms of safety installation standards as well. So that should cover off on most of the situations around batteries.
So when you say performance standards, will there be part of the sort of like a star rating of batteries eventually?
Yeah, I haven't engaged closely enough with the standard to know whether they're going to have a star system, but they will have definitely minimum performance standards that batteries need to meet. And I suspect they'll have a rating system to allow consumers to make educated choices around what products meet certain thresholds. But yeah, I mean, I think it's really important because there's a couple of things that are important with batteries. One is obviously the safety side, but you know, there's so much variability in the quality of batteries and even the chemistry of batteries that a 10 kilowatt hour battery is not really the same across different products. It's really hard to compare apples with apples, and that's part of, I suppose, what the testing we're doing is to show the difference performance. And it's you know, you need to be relatively well informed to make a good choice on battery technology, because otherwise your battery may, you know, you may be buying something you're expecting to last for 10 or 15 years and really it only lasts for 2 or 3. But it's not related necessarily to price. Buying a more expensive battery doesn't guarantee a better product. It's got to do with a number of other things.
So now that you're mentioning this, that yes, you can go and buy a battery, price doesn't indicate, it's still the market is shaping up, still there are risks because you need to find out exactly what you need, because not all batteries are same. So these are all technology risks that chases early adopters away from adopting anything, right?
Absolutely.
And Australia being an early adopter country is quite different. So is there someone who's setting it up as a battery as a service for homes, saying you sign up 3 years, 5 years, if it doesn't work out, we'll give you another battery, but you are buying a kilowatt hour per month capacity, or kilowatt per month as a capacity?
Yeah, there's been a few business models like that rolled out. So Sonnen were one of the first to do it in Australia. They had a scheme like that. I know that Tesla's looked into that. I'm not sure how progressed they are in the market. I expect that it will become more common moving forward, because it allows that risk to be taken away from the consumers, and really the risk can lie with people who are better equipped to deal with it in terms of the, you know, the companies that are rolling it out. It's definitely business models that we've looked into for clients in the past, and I see a lot of benefit to both the consumers and the companies rolling them out to look at those sorts of models. But I think they're still in their infancy here in Australia anyway.
Yeah, but Australia is leading the world in a sense. So
yes, that's right. That's right.
no, because that would be ultimately the best model, because it's there like a warranty, but it's sort of warranty taking it to the next stage, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, warranties are good, but they are a little bit of a, like, you know, they're imperfect. And you know, we've seen products that fail under warranty, and consumers are still left burnt at the end of the day, because it's a non-seamless experience to have a product replaced under warranty, and usually have an outage for quite a long time while the product gets replaced. So it's it's not a seamless process. Whereas I think that having someone who's providing battery as a service means they're incentivized to keep the uptime on the battery maximized so that they can earn that return. And I think that's important, particularly now while the products are still relatively immature. It may change as you know, the products become more mature and become more reliable, and become, I suppose, a bit more like rooftop PV, where they're sort of set and forget and you know they're going to work. And maybe that model will shift again. I am, I suppose, slightly disappointed that I haven't seen anyone really take the bull by the horn with that model and really roll it out in a way that I believe the market has the capacity to absorb in Australia. So, watch this space. Maybe we're going to see a new entrant soon.
So you said set and forget. No one is exploring that model yet. So what's your message to new battery entrepreneur wannabe? So a lot of opportunities coming up. What should that group do?
Yeah, look, I suppose I see a real opportunity. If you're a battery entrepreneur and you want to find a business model that works for you, I suppose I would probably say stay out of the technology stack from a product point of view. We don't need another battery product on the market. The products are getting quite good. Think about how you can innovate in the customer experience side through a leasing model or a battery service model. Think about how you could couple that even with a retail model, so you could retail electricity as a whole. The advantage of creating that retail market is you can then share the benefit of the battery across multiple sites. So if you find a site that has too much power, you could inject that back into the grid and actually get credits from the market as a whole, and that could help to share your cost across a number of consumers and really get a much better result than an individual consumer can get by themselves. I think there's still work to be done in the orchestration sort of market layer that does that. There are some good companies that are doing it now. Reposit Power is one of those, and I know there's a number of others that are doing it as well. So if you were coming into the market, you could either look to partner with one of those companies, because that's a key component of it, or you could look to develop your own technology stack there. But I think that probably the partnership model is better, given that some these operators have put a lot of work and develop into that space already. You wouldn't want to reinvent that.
Yeah. Also the need for speed. Yes.
Yes.
You mentioned very confidently that don't need to go and build another batteries. There's plenty out there. So you must have your favorites. Can you pick the two top batteries that are your favorites? I mean, you do a lot of tests. I'm sure you publish, no?
Yeah. Look, I try to. It's hard for me to say I'm completely independent battery tester if I have favorites, but I think there are a number.
Based on results.
Yeah, based on results. Look, and so one of the things I did look at prior to this chat was actually looking at the performance of some of the batteries, and overall, I think the batteries as a whole perform quite well. So I'd be looking realistically, not necessarily so much at the long-term performance of the battery, but their reliability as a product and the feature of the product as a whole. So I quite like the current model of the Tesla Powerwall, because it's seamless. The installers like it. It's quick to put in. I've also been quite encouraged with the performance of some of the Chinese battery cells. So the BYD and the Pylon Tech batteries have performed really well for their price point in particular. So they're sort of outperforming some of the much more expensive batteries. They're not as seamlessly integrated as say the Tesla product is, but if you've got the right provider, they can work quite well. The other one's LG. LG Chem are a big player in the market as well. And we've sort of had at some stages, they've been really good and they've had quite a good, robust product. But then at other stages, I think they've brought products to the market that are a little immature. And so they've had some issues, not necessarily long-term performance, but more, early product failures as they've rolled those out. So they're probably the ones that we've had the most success with so far in the testing. In terms of products we've rolled out into the field, so we do a lot of work in remote communities and remote areas. Mm-hmm. We've had a really good experience, both integration and robustness with the BYD batteries. They seem to work really well in standalone power systems and those sorts of environments that just seem to be quite robust.
Okay, so that's good. So typically people should, these batteries that you mentioned, these are all between 10, 14 kilowatt.
Yeah. And look, there's some batteries that We haven't had experience with in terms of testing, just because we haven't been able to fit them in. So there's batteries like the N-phase battery, which is a smaller battery. I've heard a lot of positive stories from the market of them, but I don't have any personal experience with those because we haven't been able to get them into the testing facility yet. We've also had really good performance out of Samsung batteries and Sony batteries, but they have less domestic residential products available now. I mean, Sony's really only a commercial player, and Samsung, increasingly so as well. So while those cells have performed really well under testing, and their modules have, their product availability in the market over here is either non-existent or much more limited. So not that I would steer away from those products. It's just hard to find them, I suppose.
Canberra is cold right now. What's the temperature outside? 3-4 degrees today?
Yeah, probably. We're probably coming off. Probably started at about -3 or 4 this morning, and yeah.
Now, people worry about battery in cold temperature, especially lithium batteries. I've taken photos in rural Afghanistan. I remember took my camera out, so excited, and the battery, after 2 shots, 0, you come back to your car, rub, and then it comes back. So how is the battery coping in Canberra? Why do you will put a battery in a house?
Yeah, look, in Canberra, we haven't had any issues with the cold. I mean, Canberra's not the same as some of the areas you work. We might get down to, the coldest recorded temperatures is -10, and we might get several mornings at -7. That's not really a major concern for the batteries. Typically, they're being worked enough. They have enough. They're quite densely packed, so they have quite a high specific heat. So they store heat in them. So it would take a long-term cold snap to really affect the batteries. So we're not seeing performance issues in sort of, when you're cycling between -7 and 10 degrees during the day, because they get enough warmth during the day. As they get warmth used, they create their own heat, and that tends to mean that you don't have a performance issue. If you were to leave them unused for long periods of time in that sort of weather, that may cause an issue. But I would say probably in every climate zone in Australia, you're unlikely to experience those issues with excessive cold. You're more likely to experience issues with excessive heat. On really hot days, the performance of the batteries will tail off, because they don't like they're temperamental. They like to be kept at a nice temperature somewhere in the middle. But ideally cool, not cold, not hot.
Yeah, I mean, you are not going to put those batteries outside. Mostly people are putting them in the basement. I know there's a certain Australian guidelines, right, as to where you can put.
No, the vast bulk of the ones we've been involved with are either on the side of people's houses, so they are outside, they're surface mounted, much like an inverter, or they're inside a garage. So one of those two. There's a new installation standard that has guidelines in where the batteries should be installed, and they shouldn't really be inside people's houses where it can be avoided, and ideally they should be behind basically a fire barrier. So if they're installed outside, they should be on a brick wall rather than a timber wall, just because there is like with all electronics, there is a risk of fire ultimately if there was a short, or in a battery case, thermal runaway. So yeah, most of the products are outside or in a garage at the moment.
So legally, people are not allowed to put batteries into wall cavities yet because these are not safe, no?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, there's a couple of standards that are being developed side by side, and we're still in the early stages of that. At the moment, mostly it's governed by the state regulators around their electrical safety. As we get these standards pushed forward and more product standards as well, we need to get the product standards finalised before we can finalise the installation standards. But no, you wouldn't be putting them in a bedroom, for example, or inside a flammable surface. At the moment, you need to keep them separated.
Yeah, I should have asked you to do a quick demonstration on your battery from the website, that would be fantastic. But and share this.
Yeah, or maybe you can post a link to the website, or we can share some
Yeah,
data or something like that.
yeah, I'll definitely do that. Now, coming back a macro, you of course you run a consulting company, and I think I worked with your colleague many years ago, IT Power in Mongolia in 2001 or two. Yes.
Oh wow! Yes, we've been around for a while. Been around since 1981, so been doing this for a little while.
Now, going at a very macro, if you are a Ministry of Finance in a developing country or Minister for Energy, what advice they need to get, and how do they need to see the battery as a solution to their problems?
I mean, I probably take a step back always when I'm looking at that level and say that they need to look at their electricity sector as a whole, or even their energy sector as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
Are they heavily reliant on gas? Will they continue to be heavily reliant on gas in the future, or are they going to move towards a greater electrification program in general? What pressure is that going to put on their electricity sector? Are they going to need additional generation? What's their plans for renewable energy? Are they going to have a high amount of variable renewable energy? So there's some of the things you'd look at in terms of the market, the broader electricity market as a whole, and how you balance sort of wholesale electricity flows and where storage might be needed in that. And that could be batteries, it could be other forms of storage. And then you come down the next level and you look at more the consumer or distribution level of electricity. So even if the wholesale market is balanced really well, you may still have constraints because the poles and wires are not sized properly and that sort of thing. And that's where batteries can really add another layer of benefit to the consumer, because you're offsetting upgrading a network, upgrading poles and wires, upgrading transformers, and they can really have very, very sharp payback times for batteries in those cases. Also look at, how will your electricity systems expand in the future? Is it going to be always looking like a traditional grid of large generators pumping power long distances to communities, or is it more likely to be distributed grids and more distributed technology into those, in which case the role for household solar and storage becomes much more important. So yeah, this typical consultant answer. So Hal, I'm not really giving you an answer except to say that it's complicated. And realistically, if I was working at that Ministry of Finance level, I'd probably be looking at a couple of things. One would be what's the overall master plan for electricity generation and delivery in the country as a whole, and then where does storage put into that? But then, because if I'm Ministry of Finance, I'd also be looking at what opportunities do I have to strongly move into storage now as a developing country? Could I put, production in my country? Is there other benefits that would come out of storage for my community that would potentially keep more of the balance of financial flows within my country? So if I was heavily reliant on imported fuel, for example, for my electricity sector, and putting renewable energy and batteries in would stop that dependence on imported fossil fuels, then obviously that should factor into it as well, because it will give you more energy security and less price volatility moving forward.
Sounded like you just read out the 2 paragraphs I was writing last night.
There you go. Well, we're on the same wavelength then.
I'm actually writing a para for a particular strategy paper for a country. Yeah. No, I think it's very important because the value, I'm sure, at the domestic individual customer level in Australia, for sure, adding a battery for $10,000 in your house definitely adds more value to the house if you want to sell, no?
Yeah, absolutely.
And as a country also, putting lots of batteries in the system will create a lot of other flow-on benefits, including maybe employment, creating a lot of economic activities and others. And then you mentioned at a very a macro level also production capacities and offsetting imported power, especially fossil fuel ones, no?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think countries have an opportunity now, and this is something you and I have discussed before and written papers on, around the idea of leapfrogging a technology gap, and particularly for some of these developing countries who may have very old traditional electricity systems, well, don't move to what seems like it's next in line. Try to jump the step to what's the one beyond that, and try to become a leader in this market rather than a follower. And I think that's where the real opportunities lie for some of these countries to skip a step and have a much, hopefully cheaper, more reliable system as a whole, and deliver more of that economic activity within their borders.
Yeah, and also for many countries, governance is an issue. So if you do it distributed, I mean, you will have a much better handle on distribution losses and all of those as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It can also create, as we talked about before, much more reliability and redundancy as well. Like even if those grids are interconnected, if they have the ability to isolate and run as microgrids for periods of time, then that can protect against storms and things like that might knock out major transmission lines. I mean, it's a piece of work that's going on in Australia a lot at the moment, is about distributed energy resources, but also microgrids, and how do we have a regionalization of the grid so any one area is not dependent on the whole grid as staying up, so that we can deal with an outage, for example, like what we had in South Australia a couple of years back. You could have that outage, but you could still have communities, or most communities, run independent of the grid as a whole while that issue is being rectified.
Fantastic. Thank you, Simon. I learned quite a bit. Is there anything else that I should have asked I did not ask?
No, look, I think we covered quite a lot, and it was good to have a chat. It's always good to to talk about these things, and I'm glad you got something out of it.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time. And
no worries.
Have a nice day. Let's keep in touch. Lots happening. You are at the cutting edge of the technology. I'm sure there's a lot of demand on your time as well. But thank you very much.